Well, it's time for another devotional. Just because it's Christmas season and the various things that go on during this time of year, my devotionals have been reduced to basically one a week. So this is this week's devotional. Hopefully, you're having a great Christmas season and that you're finding some peace and some time just to celebrate during this period. Anyways, let's just dive right in. It's just going to be a short one today. We're getting to the end of chapter 7 of the book of Proverbs. And these last two verses of the chapter just are some summations of the point of the whole chapter. And and I want to drive. We're looking at one verse at a time, so we'll do both verses separately. But I want to drive the point home um, by reading both verses. So verse 26 and 27. We'll focus on 26. So this verse comes, of course, at the end of the whole all the teaching of the chapter, but the story that was the center theme of the chapter, the story that he tells, the father tells the son, which is God telling us, but it's the father telling the son this story of these young people, this young man who goes out into the city at night to look for someone, and she comes out to find him, and she's married, but her husband's away, so she seduces him and entices him home, and then they have this affair, and he ends up, of course, at the end dead, or well, it implies that he will die, and so that's the story. Now the story is given to teach us, of course, all these things that we've been looking at, but the generalness of the story kind of comes down to this last couple verses where we're being warned of all the dangers of this and why we shouldn't do this. And of course, it very specifically referring to sexual sins, very specifically in this case, referring to an adulterous sin. But then we can come away from the specific to the general principle, which is that in all sin, all not just adultery, but all sexual sin, or even further out, all sin in general. This same kind of thing is a thing that we need to watch out for. This system of searching for and then being seduced by the sin. And so it comes to these last two verses. It says this: "For many are the victims she has cast down." It's talking about the seductress that drew him in. "For many are the victims she has cast down, and numerous are all her slain. Her house is the way to Sheol, which is the land of the dead, descending to the chambers of death." So the verse 26, of course, doesn't say that last part about Sheol. We'll deal with that next week. But that idea, for many are the victims she has cast down, and numerous are all her slain. Many and numerous. As we've mentioned before, there's so much of the Proverbs use this poetic style of coupling things together. And so it's just driving that point home. Many and numerous, right? And then, of course, the cast down and slain, the idea of the destruction that comes here. This idea of many and numerous, there's a couple ways we can look at that. One is just isn't it something? Just to sort of marvel at it. Like, isn't it amazing how many people fall to this particular sin, to sexual sins? Many people fall to sexual sins. Now we could say in general how all humans fall into sin over the course of our life. We all stumble into it in all sorts of different places. But when we come down to just to the sexual sin category, the falling into sexual sin is so widespread. So many fall into this and come to this end. They come to a destruction of their life, whether it be literal physical destruction of their life, which happens sometimes, often, or whether it just be the destruction of the structure of their life, that their life becomes so messed up because of this, because of sexual sin. It's very widespread. So that's one way to look at these verses and go, yeah, it's a warning of how many get caught in it. So let's not be part of the many. Let's be part of the few that don't. Those that avoid this. The other side to think about this is that when we hear words like many and numerous, there's a part of us that wants to go a different way, and we want to say, well, if it happens to so many, well, then it's kind of expected. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's like, well, it's acceptable somehow. We kind of get this thinking that it must be okay because it's normal, we might say, or whatever, because so many are doing it. And we look at many often as a way to justify ourselves. Well, everybody's doing it, right? This kind of thinking. But that's not the point that this proverb is making. Quite the opposite. This proverb is saying that unless you are careful about this, you will fall in with the many. You will fall into the flow. So avoid that. It's not acceptable. It's unacceptable, but it's so common that if you're not careful, you will easily flow in with that. This is the story of our society, our Western society. We have become so oversexed that in the area of sexual sin, it's just become what used to be perhaps a small uh, creek bed has turned into a torrential flood of just everything in our society has become overly sexualized, and so the many and the numerous is becoming even more many and numerous. And it would be easy to get swept up in that flood and just go with the go with the flow. I didn't actually plan all this metaphor, but it would be easy to happen, because the more that get caught up in it, the more others will tend to see it as justifying and somehow acceptable, and they will follow in. And this proverb is warning us: don't do that. Don't get caught in that, because it does end in cast down, and it does end in being slain. And as we'll find out next week, in the next verse, the house of the dead, the chambers of death. It ends up in the destruction of your soul, of your body, perhaps, but your soul for sure. And so it's not good. This story, of course, is not just about, as I said, not just about adultery. This story is specifically about adultery, but it's not just about adultery. It's about all moral so-called liberty, what we might call liberty. People talk about liberty and liberty is good when we use it in the right context, but being free to let's say murder somebody is not a good liberty. We shouldn't have the liberty to just kill anybody we want to. That's a liberty we should not have. We should instead have the liberty to be free from the threat of being killed unjustly. And so when we talk about liberty, there's a right and a wrongness to it, and what we call a moral code. But there's a lot of push in our world right now to upend the moral code and to try and take away any sense of morality to something. And they call that liberty, that we no longer moralize anything and therefore be free, we say. Well, that's not what happens. What happens is when we move something from the moral right, when we right and wrong, this place, we say, here's what's right and wrong. We move it to this amoral, this free amoral place. What you actually end up doing is you just pass right through that middle ground, because you've now what you've done, you've nullified right and wrong as you saw it. You pass right through that middle ground, and you go right over to a new right and wrong, which is the opposite of the one that he had over here. And so what was once considered right is now considered wrong. What was once considered wrong is now considered right. And you can apply this tendency in so many areas in our society right now, things that we knew were wrong once, and through the middle ground of liberty, we've moved it all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, and we've turned evil into a virtue, and we've turned goodness into a vice, and we really have to be careful not to let that happen to us. Every action you take has a moralness to it, and it's important that we realize that, and that we find the right moral code for everything we do, not based on what the many and the numerous are doing, but rather on what God has taught us is right and is wrong. And then we base our life on that, and you'll be on solid ground. This story in Proverbs 7, you're the young man in the story. You're the young man. And God's telling you, he's like, don't be this young man. Don't be the young man that goes off looking for the other side of the equation, the other side of the moral code, because there will be someone that will come out to meet you, and they will happily seduce you into that other side, and then you will end up in the cast down, slain place. Well, that's the lesson. I said it would be short. I guess it was almost normal time, but anyway, that's the lesson here. Hope it's useful. Once again, a lot of the Proverbs are about this, realizing that wisdom and morality go together. They do. God's morality and wisdom, they go together. True morality and wisdom, they go together. So hopefully that's useful to you today in your devotions this week. God willing, next week I'll be able to get on. And I know it's Christmas week, but I think I'm going to be in here one day during the week, and I might be able to get into verse 27. In the meantime, Merry Christmas to you. Have a wonderful weekend and Christmas Day, and I just pray that God will bless your home and all of your celebrations. in Jesus' name. Take care.